two, three, four. La 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 la. It's Wednesday. I'm very tired. Hi, picks of the week. But obviously it's not Wednesday at all. That's how tired I am. Make sure I get the. I don't want the mic not to pick up any of this gold. So, the only pickup this week that I have is Immortal Hulk number 50. I did get a few other books, but they're all from 3 weeks ago because I still haven't been paid. Kids, if you want to sell your soul in an untimely manner, I can't recommend going into marketing enough. So, this is the big finale of Al Ewing's The Immortal Hulk. And I'm very excited. I'm actually slightly less excited than I was when I read issue 49 2 months ago. But they had to get cute and push it back another month. I'm sure it'll all have been worth it. I also this week read a big chunk of Incredible Hulk from the early 2000s. Few issues that I had laying around. Later from Bruce Jones took the book over, I want to say, in 01, maybe 02. And I was a big fan of that run. That was the run that got me back into the Incredible Hulk. Bruce Jones, I haven't seen his name in a while, but he was in the 80s. He wrote a lot of kind of indie science fiction. Oh, wrong one. Not the Surfboard Maker. He wrote a lot of indie science fiction stuff, Twisted Tales, and things like that. And then see what he's up to now. I don't know. It looks like he's been pretty much since that run on the Incredible Hulk ended. He hasn't done a whole lot. I mean, I know he was. Yeah, he wrote Dead Man. I remember that, and he wrote a few other things for DC. But I don't know what he's up to now. But imagine he's writing in a more lucrative industry than funny books. But regardless, his run on the Incredible Hulk was a lot of fun. Largely, well, John Romita Jr. drew a chunk of it, so there's that. But he also really went into. Sorry, he made the book very reminiscent of the 1970s, early 80s television program, The Incredible Hulk, where Bruce Banner was essentially wandering from town to town, and it was good. Didn't end great though. When I was reading the later stuff, I was like, oh boy, I'd forgotten a lot of because I was buying the trades regularly, and then I kind of lost track, and that was like 15 years ago. And then Peter David came back to the book for a minute during House of M, and that run that what I realized reading these Marvel comics from the early 2000s is that they weren't that good. It's an era that I've always kind of romanticized because that was when I really came back to collecting superhero comics in earnest. Was in late 2001. Thanks Osama. And at the time, I felt like, oh man, these are way better than I remember them being in the 90s. And I still think that's true, but if that bar were any lower, you'd have to go into the sewer to get to the top of it. I'm not sure if that. I'm exhausted. I don't know if I've made that clear. But reading that, a lot of that Devil Hulk stuff, and a lot of this, he made the leader into a real. Maybe that wasn't Jones. No, that wasn't. That was yeah okay. Early 01, I want to say it was Paul Walker. Paul, not the actor. Or is it Paul Cornell? That's what I'm thinking of. Paul Walker, rest in peace. His run on Incredible Hulk was just fine. My point being that the whole run that Al Ewing has done on the Hulk, which has been going for about 5 years, he's called Al Ewing is a real historian, especially when it comes to Marvel comics, and he has a whole Tumblr detailing all his research and stuff. So he's read every issue of the Incredible Hulk at this point, and he, I knew he was incorporating a lot of stuff from the bygone days, but I didn't realize even up until the Bruce Jones run was he still including stuff like that, or at least the Paul Cornell run, which is not a good run, but neither is most of it. That's the other. That's the other thing. Reading those books from the early part of the century, 15, 20 years will go by from now, and I'll read stuff from now and go, ugh, what is this garbage? Comics are bad. Superhero comics are not very good. That's how I prefer my art in general. Low. But this has been an exceptional run. And that's one of the reasons I do like low art so much, is that you get an artist in there who sees past the surface, what's the word I want here? There's a lot of stuff that's poop. You have to kind of wade through it, but then you can find the heart of it. This is why I find bad movies far more interesting than good movies. I watch a lot of good movies, but I watch way more bad movies, and I watch them over and over and over and over again because this is far more interesting. And in the case of the Immortal Hulk, this we got to wrap this up. This is god awful. I've been very curious for a while now. Once the run was about 2 years in, I even wrote a letter that never got published. Was like, how are you going to follow this? And the answer was obvious then as it is now, with something completely different. Ewing is going over to Venom. He's not going to be writing Hulk anymore. And I've already read a preview of the Donny Cates run, which is coming up next, and it's completely the opposite. It's over the top. It's a lot of fights. I mean, there's been a lot of fights in this run too. It's just completely different in every possible way, really. And that's the only thing you can do. What I think I'm getting at, and I don't think I'm the first person to say this, is that the Immortal Hulk has been such a departure that the character has gone through a lot of different iterations. Everyone is familiar with the sort of elevator pitch. Bruce Banner, irradiated by gamma radiation, becomes a monster called the Hulk when he's angry. But that wasn't even the original. It was more of a werewolf thing back in the Lee and Kirby days. He would become the Hulk at night. He was a big monstrous sort of dude, but not nearly the behemoth that he would go on to become. And he was just more of Joe Fixit has become that character's name, or he's just more of an asshole, really, than anything. A big, mean one, but still just kind of, as opposed to what they kind of call the Kid or Junior, which is the big, dumb Hulk smash Hulk, want to be left alone Hulk, my personal favorite Hulk. But then there was also, for a long time, Bruce Banner had the body of the Hulk, but the mind of Bruce Banner, and he was part of the Parthenon, which was a group of superpowered individuals who were all also ancient Greeks. That was that was part of the Peter David run. That was later Peter David run. There's also been, he's on the Avengers, he's on the Defenders. There's just a bunch of different. There was, during the Peter David run, he did a whole Joe Fixit run where he was a Vegas tough guy. He was like a muscle for a casino. That was a fun run. That's one of my favorites, actually. But yeah, it's all over the place. But the Immortal Hulk has taken all these disparate Hulks and mashed them into one storyline, really for the first time. I mean, people have used different, but never to this degree. And it's really been something. I feel like this is just going to be considered it's been canon. I mean, the whole time. But that's the other thing too is the Hulk is often sort of written out of whatever's going on in Marvel comics. And I've always assumed this to be because he's so powerful. Like during the Civil War, they also had running concurrently in the Hulk was Planet Hulk, which they got a lot of that for Thor Ragnarok, that film. But they had to take the Hulk completely off planet for Civil War because if he chose a side, then that side would have that. You know what I mean? He was also because he's such a wild card and that he's not. He's always been like kind of an anti-hero. So he's always kind of been in his own corner. Probably less so like when he is the mind of Banner and the body of Hulk, because then they can use him a little bit more. He's a little more util in the sort of play of the rest of the Marvel universe. But this has been completely separate in that it's been a straight up horror book. It's a horror book, and Marvel doesn't really do a lot of horror books. They've always had some, and they've very rarely done a horror book with a superhero title. DC did it a few years back when Brian Azzarello was writing Wonder Woman, but Wonder Woman herself didn't become like a monster or anything. It was just her versus a lot of monsters. All right, I've beaten that to death. Pixar of the week. Now Pixar of the week. Okay, so last week, oh boy, A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance by Rick Remender and Andre Lima Araujo. This was incredible. The only, I mean, just visually, this was exactly what I was hoping for. Araujo is an absolute tremendous artist. Very little dialogue in this issue, as you can see. Also, I was really hoping. I was going to look up this actor's name. This actor, or the main character, is very clearly based on. Yeah, if that's not him, I'll eat my hat. Oh boy, just tell me who played the goddamn character, will you? Oh, Benedict Wong. Which I can't help but think that that helped him get the part. But regardless, and I also think that there's been definitely a lot more. I mean, with this Squid Game show, there's a lot. Asian TV and movies are really becoming more and more popular. So this whole issue really just we follow our character, our main character, as he tries to ride the bus to a crime scene, and it only gets worse from there. But I cannot wait for the rest of this. I hope this goes on for as long as any of other Remender's books have, especially because Araujo doesn't do a lot of. He's been working for DC a lot lately, which I don't have much interest in. So I also read Darkhold Alpha. This was pretty fun. This is another, not unlike Dark Ages. This feels like kind of a what if, where the real Darkhold has been unearthed, and Doctor Doom kind of ropes Scarlet Witch, who is dead, in 616. So there's your first clue. This is, but they end up having to put together a group of 5 superheroes. And so if you read the Darkhold, and I'm pretty sure this is canon, although it's been a long time since I've read any Darkhold, the more you read the Darkhold, the more it will drive you insane. And so they tell them, like, look, just read enough that you can, and we can go into this other dimension and finally destroy this thing. And then they go too far. So now the heroes are turned evil by the Darkhold, and then there'll be 5 different one shots, I believe, is how it's going to work, and then an Omega issue, which is pretty standard sort of little mini series. I mean, they don't do them like they used to, but they've been doing them like this. We have an Alpha, you have an Omega, and then a few number ones in between. Why not just do 1 through 6? That's how they do things anymore. I also read last week. I don't know if I even showed these to you guys. If I showed you these Grooves, I think I may have. This is Gru the Wanderer 4, 5, and 8 from the Pacific series. This is volume 1. Although the indicia says volume 2, but I don't think that's right. From 1984. These are the last 3 of the first 8. There was only 8 issues in this series before they went to Marvel, and now I have all of them. I only need a couple more of the Marvel run to have a complete collection too, and I'm very excited. And these are great. I mean, I've already sung the praises of Gru the Wanderer. This was a particularly fun issue because this is the first issue where he meets Captain Ajax, who's not on the cover. But this is the first issue that establishes that Gru will sink a ship every single time he's on it. Later on, because he doesn't have Referto, his canine companion in these early issues. He doesn't meet Referto. Oh, I don't remember what issue it is in the Epic series, but it's pretty early on. Who's his faithful dog? When Referto is on a boat with him, it will not sink. But if Gru is on a boat by himself, it will sink. Usually because of something stupid that Gru has done. Another thing for one thing, this era of Aragonés's artwork has always appealed to me. It's a lot rougher than it would get into the 90s, especially with these characters, because he's still learning how to draw them, sort of. Chakal, though, who is Gru's true love, or, that's how he feels. Chakal hates him. This is only the second appearance of her, and she's the first of like the supporting characters who looks how she'll always look, kind of. Gru kind of changes a little bit over the years, and so did most of the other characters. That's another thing I've always loved about Gru is that there's a fairly large cast of supporting characters, but they get reused constantly, and they never. That was the thing that it was a little frustrating as a kid, but also fun, was that they don't really tell you. There's a lot of running jokes, and there's a lot of kind of callbacks to previous jokes that if you didn't read them, they're not going to like explain it to you, which is fun. Another thing about this era of Gru that I'd noticed, and I'm sure I'd noticed it before, is that he's not quite as stupid. He gets way stupider as time goes. He's always stupid, which is always really a fun. I also forget that Gru is like a Conan parody, and so he's really dumb. In these issues, he's very dumb, but he at least has self-preservation, and so like he's smart enough to be like scared of certain things. But as time goes on, he becomes even stupider, so that he's even more brave. Like he's a tremendous warrior. That's always like he's the best swordsman in the world. He's also the biggest idiot in the world. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then this is something else I got working at the shop recently. This is Magnus Robot Fighter number 40 from the original Gold Key run. This was when, by this point, this is from like the mid-70s. And by this point, they weren't doing any new Magnus. They were just reprinting old issues. So the story in this is from like the 60s. I don't know if I've ever really talked about Magnus, but Magnus has become one of my favorite characters over the last like 10 years or so. When I was a kid, Valiant Comics, aside from their run of Jim Shooter created books like Bloodshot and Ninjak and Hardcore, there's a whole bunch of them. Very, for the time, very standard sort of superhero garbage. And I didn't care for it myself then. But they had also Valiant also owned all the Gold Key characters. So you had Turok the Dinosaur Hunter, you had Dr. Mirage, Solar Man of the Atom, and Magnus Robot Fighter. I think those were the 4. There might be one I'm forgetting. But, yeah, they were old Gold Key characters. Gold Key was a big publisher in the 40s and 50s, along with Dell, who are both now well defunct and kind of niche. Like there's not, but I mean at the time they were huge, and Gold Key and Dell between the both of them, I always get them mixed up. But they had most of the licensing, so all of your licensed characters, your Tom and Jerry's, your Looney Tunes, I believe was Dell. Uh, this is before everything was under one maybe two corporate umbrellas, and they would license characters out. Yeah, that's all. That's none of that too. So Magnus, I only knew as a '90s character, and even for the Valiant line, which at the time I didn't care for, but I liked Magnus, and I didn't read a lot of Magnus until like the early 2000s. I started at the comic shop that I started shopping at and eventually working at. There was a bunch in the quarter bin, so I had a ton of those, and I think I still have most of that run. I bought a ton of Magnus a couple of years ago that I haven't read yet. What really got me into it though was that around and about 10 years ago, maybe a little less, Valiant started publishing things again. I'm going to try and I thought this was going to be over in 5 minutes. Valiant started publishing again, and not to be outdone, I believe it was Dynamite got their hands on the Gold Key characters, which was really smart because it was like, if Valiant's going to make a comeback, and they did, and they're still an actual publisher, Dynamite was like, well, shit. Well, most people like Jimmy are going to associate the Gold Key characters with Valiant stuff. So if we can get that going, and it worked on me anyway. I bought everything that Dynamite did with all the Gold Key stuff. My friend Chuck Wendig wrote the Turok series; it was really good. Um, Solar and Doctor Mirage were fine. I really like them more than the Valiant ones, but the Magnus one was really good. And so ever since, yeah, I've been reading a lot more Magnus. Now this old Golden Age stuff I had not. I guess it's more Silver Age. I had not read a ton of, because even the reprints are kind of hard to get their hands on. But this is falling apart. Some smart ass kid went and drew Liege's tits hanging out in every panel. So when I found this and going through old Overstock, he was like, "Yeah, you can have that if you want." I'll give it a good home. But also one of the few superheroes who wears a mini skirt. When I'll tell this and then I'll get the hell out of here. But in the '90s, when that character got popular again, people were cosplaying it. This is before we called it cosplay. We just called it Lonely Boys. And Greg, what's his name? The guys who did Lethargic Comics, which I still need to get. I love that book and never finished out the run. And I think those guys went into like Greg Hyland. I think they probably went into animation or something like that. Greg Hyland drew Lethargic Comics, and they were so funny. They were all very insular. It was very much, they were parodying comics of the time. And I remember in the back of one issue, he had all these little convention sketches that I think he'd drawn in San Diego, in fact. And one of them was a guy dressed as Magnus Robot Fighter at his table. And I have no reason to believe this is a 100% true story. But he's looking at his comics, and he's kind of, and he says to Hyland, he goes, "Were you on drugs when you wrote these comics?" And Hyland said, "Were you on drugs when you left the house in a red miniskirt?" Comic nerds. Think about that, though. A guy dressed like Magnus Robot Fighter, or any superhero, take your pick, and he's going to cast aspersions on anyone else's form of creative expression. You gotta hand it to those nerds. They got a lot of balls on them. All right. Have a nice night.